as an icebreaker, do you have any, can you think of any? Things we talked about on Tuesday, yes. Yes, divorce is less stigmatized, or that the society, Korean society, is more accepting, right, of divorce. Anyone else?
The high value of romanticism.
Good. High value we place on romance. Anyone else? Something to do with men.
The unwillingness of some men to accept the changing demands and needs of women.
Very good. And something about women. Okay, they're becoming, one, financially independent, and second, they have different attitudes. They have different ideas about themselves. Okay? And here are some other factors, and we talked about this, how because Koreans think of dating so seriously, that in terms of the number of dates before getting married, I mean, I don't have a concrete data, but let's say if there were surveys like this, how many dates did you have? And you ask that to people in Korea, Japan, Denmark, USA, Canada, and I think, and I'm talking about the number of individuals that one dated before getting married. Okay? I'm not talking about actual dates with the same person. Okay? How many different, or how many people did you date before getting married? Okay? Now, to that question, I think you would all agree that Koreans, in comparison to people living in the West, that they probably had the least number, right? So that's why, because of that lack of experience with the opposite sex, leads to, sort of Koreans' maybe relative inability to deal with many interpersonal problems involving the opposite sex, or, in couple situations. Lack of independence. I think this is controversial, because the point here is that because young Koreans are so pampered by their parents, right? Because parents do so much for them, right? So that even when it comes to, problems that they really need to deal with by themselves, they may not know the right answer because they're sort of, had so many things taken care of by their parents. Is this a good possible factor, or is it just too much? And I'd like to ask Korean students, because I think foreigners may be like nodding, but what about Korean students? Is it an acceptable, plausible explanation for the high divorce rate that exists in Korea? No thoughts? Well, think about it. I think this is sort of after the fact, meaning because it is true that when you don't have children, it's easier to get divorced. And the fact that we have one of the lowest fertility rates in the world, tells us that it's that much easier for them to get divorced. Now, the last slide was the sort of the last thing I'll talk about when it comes to the factors causing Korea to have a high divorce rate. So this is sort of something totally different. For example, this is not a definitive sort of observation or comment, but you know how you may think of sort of two contrasting situations. One situation in which parents are always fighting, but the family stays intact. Compare that with children growing in a single parent family. Okay, so divorce has happened. Now they live with one parent. Now, if you think of the psychological impact on the children, which type do you think is better? Okay? Just for the sake of keeping the family together, couples who are always fighting, they live with their children. Is that better, or you end this bitter relationship and get divorced and have one parent raise the children? So there may be many differing psychological results, but I think it sort of slants more toward the latter, where it is better for children to live within a more psychologically stabilizing situation in which, so there could be sort of a financial duress, but at least in terms of being subjected to tension and all that, it is a very possible sort of a thing that living in a single parent household is more psychologically stable than living in a habitually sort of a tension-filled household. Okay? And this is also a very interesting point. And the article that you have to read, I think this is assigned, and the title of the article is "Home is a Place to Rest." So, what does this phrase? To whom does this phrase apply to? Men, because and this tradition goes all the way back to the Joseon dynasty, right? Because men typically worked outside the home, and women typically worked inside the home, and that itself, and I told you repeatedly that the point about just only men working outside the home applies to 양반 sort of men and women, meaning how we say wives, we call wives 집사람, 안사람. It's all in reference to women of the aristocratic class. Okay. Now I actually have to look into this, and I want you to do the same thing. Now, during the Joseon dynasty, was it true that even women of the commoner class, and maybe even slave class, did these women, like their masters, talking about 양반 women, were they mostly stuck inside the house? Isn't this an interesting question? Or does anybody know? Because I've been always saying that most of the things that are said about men and women in the Joseon dynasty are about 양반 men and 양반 women. But when it comes to men working outside the house and women stuck inside or working inside the house, is that universally applicable to all women during the Joseon Dynasty? So this is a real, I think, nice input from you guys that I could look forward to. Okay, so this tradition is still alive, according to the article, according to the author of this article. Because what do men typically do? And I can only say, look at how your father, right? So the kinds of observations that you made about your father, maybe older brother or relatives who are men, right? And again, the article makes generalization, but of course generalizations always sometimes overdo it, right? They make sort of a sweeping generalizations, but it does contain a large degree of truth. So what the idea is that, they earn money, and all men want to do, or what the only thing that men are expected to do in the family is to earn money and bring honor to the family. And when men do that, they're excused from doing anything else. So when they come home, they rest, they sleep, and when men say, I just want to sleep, and it's changing now, right? I'm sure couples in their 30s are much different from your parent generation. But at least up to your parent generation, that's what men did, okay? To work outside the house for a very long time. Now, for those of you who have lived outside Korea, okay, I'm talking about Korean students, you know that in North America, and probably this is true for Europe too, men and women who work outside the home, after work, at 5 o'clock, when the work ends, what do these people do? They head home, okay? Having dinner at home is almost a certain thing for, I think, most workers who are married, okay? But in Korea, what's the trend? The eating at home, like eating dinner at home, is an exception. It happens very rarely. So much so that if you come home at 7 o'clock and I expect your wife, or call your wife to say, I'm coming home to have dinner, your wife gets worried. Something must have happened. That's how rare it is. Because men work outside the house, they're eating outside the house all the time, I would say. It's sort of there are exceptions, but that's how frequent that is. Whereas almost the universal norm in the West for married men are to finish their work and head home and have dinner with the family, right? So, and that kind of difference is explained by the fact that women in Korea, wives that is, they sort of take this as something that all men have to do, okay? To stay, in a way, competitive, meaning if office workers hang out, you have to hang out with them to feel not left out and to get all the relevant information and to have a nice relationship with your senior, right? So that's why we're talking about just men here. Men sort of do what they have to do outside the home, and that could be, staying out till like midnight. And I think from my own observation, this sort of a culture has allowed men to take advantage. Okay? Because if you say that, you know, I have this company outing, then the wife understands. But you know how, if that's sort of accepted by the wife, you know how men could take advantage of that, right? And if you never really understood why your father acted the way you did, or why the way he did, I'd like to ask you, after class, do you want to rush home? Do you live with your parents? Do you want to rush home, or do you want to hang out with your friends? After all the classes are over. You want to go home. What about you? Hang out. You? I'd like to just ask Korean students. Hang out. No, now, do you understand why your father stayed outside the whole time? Because it's more fun. Okay? And they know they could do that because it's culture. Your mother can never say, come home for dinner, because your father has all the right excuses to be outside. Okay? Because, I mean, how many women are there in Korea who could say, I don't care what happens, you know, at your company, I want you to be home for dinner. See? There are not too many Korean women who are that brave, or maybe that courageous to say that, right? So, again, I can say this as a man, because men in Korea do take advantage of this culture where men are expected to be outside, earning money, and bringing honor to the family. Honor meaning getting promoted, right? And because man's role is largely limited to earning income and bringing honor to the family, we have this phenomenon called wild geese fathers. You know what wild geese fathers are? We have a lot of Koreans whose families, or should I say, the mother and children, or mother and child, are studying overseas, while man stays behind, earns money, and sends practically everything he earns to the family in Canada, United States, Australia, and more recently, China. We're talking about tens of thousands of families like that, and that is possible because of this phenomenon. Because husband's or father's role has never been that of like the West, where fathers, not only in addition to earning money for the family, father had more roles to play. Playing with the kids, having this emotional ties. But, you know, I'm not going to be asking Korean students, you know, do you have emotional ties with your father? But the point is, fathers' roles have been largely limited to, again, making money for the family and doing whatever they can to make the family proud. And as long as those duties were performed, the man's sort of contribution to the family was made. That is why man had the right to just rest at home on weekends, and that is why when men lost their jobs, you know, we've heard many stories of how that led to serious family problems. Because if men lose their job, or if men are fired, I'm talking about men in their 40s and 50s, and you sort of think of Korean wives being compassionate and sort of caring. I mean, of course, there are wives like that, but you know, men really lose their sense of pride very deeply, because for all their lives, they have been sort of inculcated with this idea that their primary goals are things they do outside rather than inside. Okay? For the things I just said so far, does anybody have a comment to make? Is what I said like all agreeable? There's got to be someone who could say no. Something is not. It's not. You know. There's more to what I said. That kind of thing. No. And for young women in this classroom, if you get married, and if the same thing happens as you observed with your parents, is that acceptable? Korean female students, if the same thing happens, would you take that as inevitable and? Oh.
It comes from very early.
Okay.
He likes having dinner at home. So I'm kind of used to that kind of culture. So I think like it would upset me like other people come from me.
What about your father? What about yours? Okay. Yours.
My dad was very diseased.
How was it when he was younger?
Well, he always he doesn't do the house stays home, watch TV.
Students of all the exceptional cases are sitting in the front. And yours? Oh. And your father?
Before, my father used to drink every day and
Came home late.
at all. But now, after changing his work, he became more
Home-oriented. How, I guess he's, no, it's okay. We have a joke in Korea that you better be nice to your wife as you get older. Because of what? You saw how the divorce rate in Korea is the highest for those who have been married for more than 20 years, right? So men know this, so that they become nicer to their wives as they have, counting the years of marriage. Last, what about you?
My dad loves to compliment me too. And his nickname is like loves to punch because he's always calm. He always does dinner with us. That in a way kind of stresses mom because she wants to have her own time.
Good point. You?
Actually, my father is very similar to her father. My father doesn't like drinking very much, so that he always came over early and
I didn't ask this, but I think I get a sense that some of your parents must be not salarymen, rather business owners, right? So I think, okay. Your father is an employee.
Yes.
I'm not talking about the rank. I'm just talking, as long as you don't own your own company, you're an employee, right? So your father is an employee. What about yours? So we have all these exceptional cases which tends to invalidate what I have been just talking about. But I think many of you would agree that this is this article is really a nice article that tries to explain why we have so many men who, stay outside the house until really late at night or early in the morning and do very little at home, right? Except to rest, right? And how Their roles are largely devoid of any emotional ties to the family members, compared to, let's say, the West, okay, where the family, the men are much more family oriented. Now, let me ask students from the West, am I exaggerating when I say that typically men who are married, after work, they rush home for dinner, yes or no? Okay. So that this much has to be made clear that in Korea, it is definitely not true, okay? Men who rush home after work, we say, are honeymooners. Okay? They do that only in their first 1 or 2 years of marriage, but after that, sayonara to dinner at home. It's, again, generalization. Okay, now we turn to anti-shell marriages. And we have really interesting names for this. Anti-shell marriage is a Western term to describe a marriage or a couple where there is no love between them, but just live together. And in Korea, we call them show window bubu, or show window couple. Isn't this really interesting term? Or 유령 bubu, ghost couples. Now, if you type ghost couples in Google, you really get an interesting results, because in English you refer to ghost couples to people who remain married in death, that kind of thing. Okay, but in Korea we have a totally different meaning. It's about how you have this appearance of a married couple, but in reality it does not exist. That's why we have this union couple. Okay? And so I've never seen any data that showed what percentage of marriages or couples are in anti-shell marriages. So, because it's like, how could you ask anybody, are you living in an anti-shell marriage? You can never do that, right? So, but you can only guess, right, how many couples in Korea are living in anti-shell marriages, and my guess is that it's high, okay, in Korea, because I think divorce is still, compared to the West, it's not an easy decision because of the face factor, right, and also children, right? So here are some characteristics of anti-shell marriages. A, the spouses feel no strong attachment to each other. They enjoy few activities together. Seldom display pleasure in being each other's company. So, they may eat together, but they don't talk. I'm sure I don't have to explain further as to what these mean. There is little fun or laughter, and members do not share their problems or experiences with each other. Okay? I don't have to share with you some of the details that I know of people I know. Okay? Where this one person I know, he would stay outside as long as he could, till 10, 11, maybe midnight, goes home, does not see his wife because she's sleeping. And he sleeps in his own room, and he gets up early in the morning to go to work, doesn't see his wife. Okay? And that life pattern repeats every day. Okay? And I'm not saying that is typical, but that is just one good example of anti-shell marriage. And what does the wife do? She just takes care of the children. Okay? And because I think, Korea is still not as westernized as some of you may believe. When Korean women have children, they are very devoted to their children, okay? And that's why, in spite of the fact that there's no love, they just sort of think of this as their duty and obligation to take care of their children, okay? And D, little spontaneous expression of affection or sharing of a personal experience. I think this should actually be, sexual relations are almost non-existent. Okay? Let me change this to that. Okay? Because in anti-shell marriages, I just don't believe or cannot imagine sex being there, at least in the Korean context. Okay? Children are often starved for love, or they receive the love that would otherwise go to the spouse. So this is in the case of Korean women or wives, mothers, who don't feel any love for their husbands, or not feeling any love from their husbands, they channel all of their love to their children. That's why one of the stereotypes of Korean mothers is their undying, sort of undivided devotion to their children, right? But in healthy marriages, as you would agree, women's love is divided. Some to their husbands and some to their children. But when that love that should have been gone to or displayed toward the husband is not there, all of that goes to the children. Okay? So they become very protective of their children and become very sensitive with any little issue when it comes to their children. Okay? Because they're so fixated on the welfare of their children. As members are highly aware of each other's weaknesses and vulnerable points, they manage to mention these areas frequently in order to hurt each other. Any comment up to this point? Okay, and there are three types of anti-shell marriages. One is devitalized relationship. Husband and wife lack excitement for or real interest in their spouse or their marriage. So there exists boredom and apathy. And serious arguments are rare. And the second type is conflict habituated relationship. They frequently quarrel. Okay? But among the many middle and above the upper middle classes who have anti-shell marriages, this is the most common type. Okay? Because they are in this because, in the case of a woman, for example, if the husband brings in, sufficient income, then there is no real need to fight. You just, just live together and take care of children. Okay? And this is the relationship in which they're always fighting, they hate each other. Okay? And let's look at what the third type is. Third type is passive congenial relationship. This is the best of the three. Neither partner is happy with the marriage, but both are generally content with their lives and they very seldom quarrel. May have some interest in common, but that adds very little excitement or romance to the relationship and contributes little to each other's real satisfactions. So this one is not really that different from the first one, is it? But this is slightly more positive than the first one. Okay? And I hope you're not thinking, this my words. But let's not pass any sort of evaluative judgments on this, okay? Because we're talking about phenomena, right? Then why do couples remain in empty shell marriages or show windows? Why do some couples remain as show window couples? And some reasons must come as obvious. Yes,
Financial reasons.
very good. Financial reasons. Reputation. Children. Very good. So money, reputation, children. Pretty much covers everything. But is there anything else? Religion. That's a good one. You know, because you probably think that getting divorced is a sin, right? Yes. Chimya. Similar to reputation, but yes, very good. Chimya. Anyone else?
Maybe in the devitalized or passive congenial relationships, they don't really see a need to get divorced because they're unhappy with each other, but in general, they're content. So they don't really see a need to go through the process of getting divorced.
Or they don't think of any viable alternative, right? They may think, I don't like my husband, but what are the chances of me finding a really nice guy, right? Or someone whom I can really fall in love with. That kind of a passive fatalism, sort of, yes.
So I'll just ask you a question. Is it very like older couples dating scene? Is it like 40 or up dating?
What age are you talking about?
40-year-olds dating?
They're young. People in their, you know, UN has come up with a new way to sort of categorize youth, young adults, middle age, and so on, because now life expectancy, we're looking at 100 years old, right? So
they're young 40-year-olds dating?
I mean, if they're married, they should not be dating, but many are dating, yes.
Okay, so that's just wondering. Because like if there's not a lot of dating 4-year-olds who are dating, it's just like remain in marriage. It's hard to find people.
I think this is a really complex question. Let me ask back. Like, again, this is not based on any hard fact, but in the West, is dating outside of marriage like common, both men and women? Yes.
It depends on the relationship that you work out with your spouse. There's several different categories, and one of them is an open relationship where you are married, but both of you realize, oh, we're just gonna go out and find.
Okay, but that's a very small minority who are engaged in this open marriage, right?
It is on the rise.
It is on the rise. But let's talk about the majority who are in an ordinary marriage relationship. Yes. Yeah, is that sort of a common? Because in Korea, I get a sense that it's more common than it is in the West. Yeah, they're married, but they're like engaging in extramarital.
It's not cheating.
It is.
I'm pretty sure that doesn't happen. Not just sliding around before.
I know. So you're saying it's rare.
Well, that's cheating, essentially.
See, in Korea, it is not called cheating. It is called. It's all about interpretation, right? No, I'm Korean too, you know. Okay, let me ask Korean students: is your sense what's going on in Korea is cheating by married couples. We think it's common.
So you're married and then you date outside of
You're having an extramarital affair.
Yeah,
Yes.
infidelity, adultery,
Still
cheating.
cheating.
Are you sleeping with the other person also?
Who?
Like when you're dating outside of your marriage, like are you also having sex outside?
Let's not use the term you, but when people engage in extramarital affairs, I think ultimately it is to engage in that, right? I think for most people who do engage in extramarital affairs. Yes.
I don't think she was talking about like extramarital affairs. I think she was saying if you were to get divorced, is there a dating pool for
Yes.
remarriage?
Oh,
I don't think she was talking
That's
about
why they
like
might say.
extramarital affairs.
And
because we have a very sort of a strong sort of a blind date culture. Blind date culture meaning we call it 소개팅, okay, introductory meeting. So we would, have two people meet at a certain place by themselves. But from what I know, blind date is sort of looked down on, right, in the West, because people believe that if you want to date, you gotta find your own date, right? But relying on someone else sort of makes people to sort of look down on blind dates. But in Korea, it's very common. Okay? And if you're at, let's say, the age of 30, for men who's, untied and is looking for a girlfriend, always asks, I'd like to meet a woman, and sort of, he would ask relatives, friends, even parents for 소개팅, right? So I sort of, my conviction was reaffirmed that in the West, maybe because of the Christian influence, this sort of cheating is sort of really, in a way, despised. At least you start off with that, okay? Whereas again, this is from my observation, right? That in Korea, they're much more lenient on this, okay? We don't have this sense of sin against sort of cheating because there's no tradition of that. Okay? We don't have 10 Commandments, right? And did Confucius ever teach anything about cheating on your wife?
We think in Korea adultery is more accepted than this.
That is my sense because let me share just with you one survey which asked Korean married men, have you ever had extramarital sex? To which nearly 40% of husbands said yes. 40%. And you know why many Koreans laughed at that? Korean men. Because that was too low. I'm not kidding, yes.
But is it only
Much more, I think, it's definitely much more common and much more accepted among men, for men.
I was reading the other day that the Supreme Court overturned
The Constitutional Court,
the Constitutional Court overturned
adultery, yes. So it's no longer, so no one can no longer be criminally punished for committing an adultery.
Doesn't that suggest that when the law was made by Parliament, that the norms were against the concept of adultery and not like that kind of disagreement with the
I don't think some laws are made for the protection of a particular group of people. So in this case, the law came into effect. I mean, law against adultery to protect women. Okay, but we found out that when it came to actual punishment, more women were punished than men. Okay, and sort of it really did not have any real impact in sort of reducing the cases of adultery in Korea. Okay? And let me not go any further into this. Okay? But do your own studies, because it's really interesting as to why we're in some respects different. Okay, why do couples remain in anti-shell marriages? Couples, especially mothers, believe that ending the marriage would harm the children. So children factor was there. Second, outward appearances. So this is cheomyeon, reputation. Third, couples may believe that getting divorced is morally wrong, religious reason, right? Couples may believe, especially those who are affluent, loveless marriage is preferable to divorce and to the uncertainty of remarriage, right? And fifth, investment reasons. So, very practical, right? Because you have all these joint ownerships of everything, and by getting divorced, you have to, cut the house in half, cut the boat in half. Just kidding. Dividing the property and assets, something that they don't want to do, and so what they say, what the heck, I guess this is my fate, kind of thing. The lack of financial independence, that's really important I think for women, right? So I'm just making a point about not just Korea, but for countries all over the world. If for some, this is just a hypothetical, right? Maybe even fantastical idea, where if every woman in the world had financial independence, I will bet you any money that the divorce rate would skyrocket. Okay? I'm talking about, let's say, many countries doubling their divorce rate. Okay? Because and seventh reason why couples remain in ghost marriages, fear of loneliness. I think this is a good one too, right? Okay. This is, I guess I get to give you more time than I anticipated. Maybe we went through the lecture too fast. But this is all I have for you today. And I want you to get into your group sort of introduction and discussion mode. And this is where you will find your group members.